James Comey's indictment is the tip of an iceberg that runs deep into dark waters of some of the most powerful figures in the last 20 years. It's part of a larger investigation by Donald Trump, which could lead to the indictment of major political figures, including Loretta Lynch, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, and possibly even Barack Obama himself. I'm Ron Chapman. I'm a former prosecutor and defense attorney. I've seen both sides. I know how these people operate. I know how to unravel their lies. I know the laws we use to catch them. Here on Off Air, you'll get one of the deepest investigations on the internet into James Comey, Hillary Clinton, the Clinton Foundation, and the unjust prosecutions against Donald Trump. I've spent over 1,000 hours investigating Hillary Clinton, the Clinton Foundation, James Comey, and the lies that supported multiple prosecutions against the President of the United States. This is a connected web that we will continue to unravel here on Off Air. In this episode, you'll hear how James Comey lied to the FBI and to Congress, and how others put forward a document that cost the Hillary campaign $1 million to start the investigation into Donald Trump. You'll hear how Comey was at the center of an effort to elect Hillary Clinton through a cover-up of her lies and a smear campaign built on Russian disinformation. You'll see how Comey and his men knew well about the lies in the affidavit, tried to prosecute their way out of the trouble they caused, and lied to the FISA court, leading to the prosecutions of General Flynn and others who spent real time in jail. By the end of this episode, you'll start to see that this isn't just about a false statement. This was an attempted coup in the United States of America with the potential to destabilize our country far more than any of the events of January 6th. So let's go into the charges. I know the defenses and what James Comey will likely say. On September 25th, 2025, a federal grand jury in the Eastern District of Virginia charged James B. Comey with 2 crimes tied to his sworn testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee. That testimony was on September 30th, 2020. He was charged with making a materially false statement in violation of 18 U.S.C. 1001 and obstructing a congressional proceeding in violation of 1505. Now, Section 1001 is not a novel crime. It criminalizes knowingly making a materially false statement in any matter within the jurisdiction of the U.S. government, including Congress. Section 1505 prohibits corruptly impeding a congressional inquiry. These are basic offenses. Yes, an indictment is only an accusation, but when we test, as I will in a minute, the undisputed public evidence against the elements of these crimes, the case for guilt of James B. Comey is straightforward. Now, who was the prosecutor that brought these charges? Lindsay Halligan was named interim U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia only on September 22nd, 2025, replacing acting U.S. Attorney Eric Siebert, who was fired by Trump. Before that, Halligan was a White House staffer serving as special assistant to the president and senior associate staff secretary in early 2025. Her legal background is unconventional for a U.S. attorney, but that's probably what we need. She began her career as an insurance lawyer, became a partner at a Florida firm, and later worked in the Trump-aligned legal work, including litigation tied to the unjust Mar-a-Lago search warrant. She had no prior prosecutorial courtroom experience, according to multiple reports. So the leap she made announcing the indictment of a former FBI director and U.S. attorney was dramatic. On September 25th, 2025, the grand jury indicted James Comey, charging him with false statements. That was just a few days after she was announced U.S. attorney. Halligan publicly announced the indictment, and in the official press release, she said, "The balance of power is a bedrock principle in our democracy. Any intent to avoid, evade, prevent, or obstruct compliance is a violation of the law." She didn't say this, but no one is above the law. Halligan's decision to bring charges so early in her post stirred swift pushback and controversy from the mainstream media. They jumped to Comey's defense immediately, highlighting how fresh she is as a U.S. attorney and how she stood in front of a grand jury alone, even taking shots at her because she was a woman. Newsweek ran a piece headlined, Lindsay Halligan is already making mistakes prosecuting James Comey simply because a judge asked a question about the indictment at arraignment. But Halligan's move is undoubtedly brave. She stepped into one of the most politically charged prosecutions in a generation less than a week into her interim tenure. The reality is that during her law school years, she interned at the Innocence Project and the Miami Public Dade Defender's Office. Those are public interest, high stakes environment, good for exposure into criminal defense, even before formal prosecutorial experience. She's been on Trump's legal team since 2022 and must have impressed him greatly. She was a senior associate staff secretary to the president and has the backing of Kash Patel Pambondi and her remaining AUSA staff. Meanwhile, Patrick Fitzgerald, Comey's defense attorney, just left the DOJ when was a career DOJ official, and he left in June 2025. He's relatively new to the defense of these types of cases. Now, let me just say this. Halligan stepped forward and did something incredibly brave. She didn't have the support of any of her counterparts, AUSAs in that office, and she stood before that grand jury alone to deliver indictment against a former FBI director, and she did so knowing she would get roasted in the press, and that's what she got. They said she was just a secretary. They said she didn't know what she was doing. They claimed that she was in over her skis. But the reality is that this person spent a long time right next to Donald Trump dealing with the mess of the Mar-a-Lago search warrants and is a perfect choice to represent the United States of America against James B. Comey. Now let's talk a bit about the evidence that Halligan has to prosecute James Comey. On May 3rd, 2017, under specific questioning from then Chairman Chuck Grassley, Comey was asked two very simple questions. Have you ever been an anonymous source in news reports about matters relating to the Trump investigation or the Clinton investigation? And that's very important coming up. Comey said, never. Have you ever authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source in news reports about the Trump investigation or the Clinton investigation? Comey, no. On September 30th, 2020, during an oversight hearing titled Oversight of the Crossfire Hurricane Investigation Day 3, Senator Ted Cruz pressed Comey on those 2017 answers in a meticulous cross-examination. Comey reaffirmed them, and he said, I stand by the testimony you summarized that I gave in May of 2017. That's the moment the indictment targets. The question by a senator and a lie by a former director of the FBI. Why did that denial matter so much? Why was it material? The Justice Department Inspector General documented that in late October 2016, days before the U.S. presidential election, Deputy Director Andrew McCabe authorized the FBI's special counsel and Assistant Director for Public Affairs to discuss the Bureau's Clinton Foundation work with Devlin Barrett of the Wall Street Journal. On October 30th, 2016, Wall Street Journal article ran with an anonymous sourcing. The OIG traced that authorization, criticized aspects of it, and found McCabe lacked candor in discussing it later. Why is that relevant to Comey? Because the Senate's 2017 questions were broad, not did you personally leak, but whether he ever authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source in stories about the Trump or Clinton investigations. The authorization culture at the very top mattered, and Comey chose a lie. The 2025 indictment goes further. It alleges that Comey himself authorized a person styled Person 3 to serve as an anonymous source regarding FBI investigations concerning Person 1 as named in the indictment. His blanket denial to the Senate was false. If you're thinking, but didn't the OIG say McCabe authorized a Wall Street Journal disclosure? Sure. But McCabe did it too is never going to be a defense to a 1001 charge. When you raise your hand to say you're going to tell the truth, you've got to tell the truth or you get charged. Will Comey be convicted? My answer is yes. And that's different than what the mainstream media is reporting. A statement within congressional jurisdiction, Comey's 2020 reaffirmation that he stood by, occurred in a Senate judiciary hearing after he raised his right hand and gave an oath. The statement was certainly false. McCabe agrees, and everybody else agrees, that Comey did authorize a leak. Let's go to the knowledge and willfulness, which is an element of this offense. This wasn't a slip up. Comey used absolutes in 2017 and then readopted them in 2020, years after the leak and his ability to clarify whatever he said to Congress. Now, were these statements material? That's usually where these cases rest. Whether the Bureau's leader, the FBI director, authorized anonymous sourcing on an FBI investigation that was politically explosive, involved the election of a United States president and two political candidates, that is 1000% material, and nobody could argue otherwise. To convict under the second charge that Comey was charged with, 1505, the government must show that the defendant corruptly endeavored to instruct a congressional proceeding. Lying to a congressional proceeding is obstructing. So they really just have to prove that he made a false statement. Here we have a formal judiciary proceeding. That was the Judiciary Committee, Dirksen's G5 September 30th, 2020 hearing. And the topic was whether or not Comey leaked. His false reassurances, I stand by that, no, tended to derail rather than illuminate congressional oversight. Derail means obstruct. Illuminate means to tell the truth. Comey will be convicted of that charge. Likely defenses. How's Comey going to defend this? How does he get out of this mess? The question was ambiguous, he might say. No, that's not true. Grassley's questions were not ambiguous and incredibly direct. And he had the ability to clarify his answer later. He may say that he didn't personally push send on any email or message to McCabe authorizing the leak, but we have the OIG's 2018 report, which documents top-level authorizations for anonymous sourcing. This case is in the bag for the U.S. Attorney's Office. He could say that the lie was not material. That would be rich for Comey. Materiality really hinges on whether or not this lie had any impact, and it certainly did. Leaking information related to the Hillary Clinton investigation and the investigation into Donald Trump prevented Congress from doing its job and prevented the FBI from fully investigating these matters. And we're going to talk in a second about how James Comey effectively killed the investigation into Hillary Clinton and increased the evidence against Donald Trump falsely by using the Steele dossier. So let's get into that. One of the most underreported stories related to all of this was the 2016 Clinton investigations against the Clinton Foundation. By the summer of 2016, the FBI was actively examining whether the Clinton Foundation had engaged in pay-to-play conduct, which I talked about in a prior episode and went over pretty clearly. Andrew McCabe, then deputy director, authorized staff and the Bureau's Office of Public Affairs to leak details of the foundation probe. Why? To try to kill the foundation's probe. That was leaked to the Wall Street Journal on October of 2016. The article ran just before Election Day, and the OIG later disclosed during their investigation that those representations were false, right before an election. The OIG, in its investigation, later concluded that the disclosures that McCabe made and the leaks to the press were false information to deceive the public. Sound familiar? Exactly what they tried to get Donald Trump for. Now, I said that Comey tried to kill the Clinton investigations, and in fact, he was successful with it, unless they're revived, which they certainly are, starting with his indictment. The Clinton investigations that were going on in 2016 didn't end with a trial. They ended with a press conference. On July 5th, 2016, James Comey, in an unprecedented step, addressed the U.S. public and unilaterally announced that no reasonable prosecutor would bring charges against Hillary Clinton for possessing secret information, for wiping her email server, and for lying in her statement. Remember, that was July 5th, 2016. Just a week before, Bill Clinton boarded an airplane with Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General at the time, on a Phoenix tarmac, and in a private meeting that shattered the confidence in the Department of Justice, spoke directly with Loretta Lynch while his wife and his foundation were under investigation. 8 days later, Comey stepped up to the American people to deliver the fix, declaring Clinton extremely careless but not criminal. He buried the email case on his own. And once the Bureau gave Clinton a pass on her emails, the Clinton Foundation investigation lost momentum too. You can't convict somebody when the person who did the investigation stood before the American people and said no reasonable prosecutor could do it. That's why James Comey is under indictment today. That's why he will be convicted. And that's why this indictment is really one further step into the investigation and prosecution of Hillary Rodham Clinton. Comey will be convicted. Comey will then try to make a deal to avoid a prison sentence. That deal is most likely going to include providing information about what happened on that plane with Loretta Lynch, about why he buried this investigation, and about why he put leaks forward to the Wall Street Journal in order to attempt to soften the investigation. James Comey put his thumb on the scale of justice. James Comey pushed false information forward to the American people. Had Hillary Clinton been elected president, these lies would have been covered up and we would not know about them now. But given that it was not successful, we can unravel this. On future episodes of Off Air, we're going to dive even deeper into what happened on that tarmac. We're going to talk more about James Comey's potential information. We're going to go through some of the FBI files related to this. And by the end of this series, you're going to be convinced that James Comey, Hillary Clinton, and others conspired to overthrow the government. I'm Ron Chapman. This is Off Air. If you enjoyed this, click subscribe. Make sure you hit the bell notification so you get future videos and future releases. Drop me a comment on what you want to hear next. And I want to give a shout out to the members. You've been so gracious. We've got so many new members that have joined up. I certainly appreciate your support. I'm Ron Chapman. This is Off Air.